It's for the restroom. Go wash the toilet, you ape! How dare you talk to my child?
Go wash the toilet! Go wash the toilet, you ape!
When Dr. Simone Blake wheeled her 12-year-old daughter through the bustling terminal of Chicago O'Hare International Airport, she had no idea that the next 14 hours would test every ounce of strength she'd built over her 43 years of life. Her daughter, Kennedy, sat quietly in her wheelchair, clutching her favorite book about astronauts, her eyes bright with the kind of excitement only a child embarking on their first international trip could have. They were heading to London, a dream vacation Simone had been planning for 2 years, ever since Kennedy's last surgery had been declared a success. This was supposed to be a celebration, a moment of joy after so much struggle. But sometimes the universe has other plans. Simone was a woman who commanded respect without demanding it. She stood 5'7", with natural hair styled in elegant locks that fell past her shoulders, and she wore a tailored navy blazer over a simple white blouse and jeans. She worked as a pediatric neurosurgeon at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, one of the most prestigious medical centers in the country. She'd spent 15 years perfecting her craft, saving children's lives, and fighting her way through a system that often made her prove herself twice as hard for half the recognition. But none of that mattered today. Today she was just a mother taking her daughter on the adventure of a lifetime. Kennedy had been born with spina bifida, a condition that affected her mobility and required years of surgeries, physical therapy, and endless doctor visits. But that girl, that beautiful, brilliant girl, never let anything dim her spirit. At 12 years old, she was reading at a high school level, she taught herself basic coding, and she dreamed of becoming an aerospace engineer. "Mom," she'd said one night while they planned this trip, "I want to see the Royal Observatory in Greenwich. That's where they measure time for the whole world." Simone had smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "Then that's exactly where we'll go, baby." As they approached the check-in counter for Transatlantic Airways, Simone noticed the line was unusually long. She glanced at her watch. They had 2 hours before boarding, plenty of time, but she preferred to get Kennedy settled early to avoid any stress. The airline had been notified weeks in advance about Kennedy's wheelchair and her medical needs. Everything was supposed to be arranged. Pre-boarding had been confirmed. Special assistance had been requested and approved. Simone had triple-checked every detail because that's what you did when you were a black woman traveling with a disabled child. You prepared for everything. The check-in area was chaos. Travelers rushed past with oversized luggage, families argued over tickets, and the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead with that particular airport frequency that made everything feel slightly unreal. Simone maneuvered Kennedy's wheelchair toward the priority assistance line, the one clearly marked for passengers requiring special services. They waited their turn, Kennedy humming softly to herself, when a voice cut through the noise like a knife through silk. "Excuse me, you need to move to the regular line." Simone looked up to see a flight attendant standing before them. The woman was tall, blonde, probably in her early 30s, with her hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her features. Her name tag read Bethany Sullivan, and her smile was the kind that never reached her eyes. There was something in the way she stood, arms crossed, weight shifted to one hip, that immediately put Simone on alert. She'd seen that posture before, that particular blend of authority and disdain. "I'm sorry?" Simone said, keeping her voice calm and professional. "This is the priority assistance line. My daughter requires wheelchair service and we have pre-boarding arrangements." Bethany's eyes flicked down to Kennedy, then back to Simone, and in that half-second glance, Simone saw it. The judgment. The dismissal. The assumption. "Ma'am, this line is for first-class passengers and our platinum members. You'll need to check in through the regular queue." Simone felt her jaw tighten, but she maintained her composure. "I understand that, but we specifically requested special assistance for my daughter's wheelchair. We were told to use this line when we called 3 weeks ago." "Well, I don't see any notes here," Bethany said, not even bothering to look at her tablet. "And even if you did request it, we're very busy today. You'll have to wait like everyone else. We'll call you when we're ready." Kennedy's hand found Simone's, squeezing gently. At 12 years old, she'd already learned to read the room, to sense when her mother was fighting battles she shouldn't have to fight. "Mom, it's okay," she whispered. "We have time." But it wasn't okay. Simone knew this game. She'd played it her entire life. The subtle exclusions. The convenient forgetfulness. The way rules suddenly became flexible or rigid depending on who was asking. She pulled out her phone, scrolling to the email confirmation from Transatlantic Airways, the one that explicitly stated their priority boarding and assistance arrangements. Actually, I have the confirmation right here. If you'd like to see it. Ma'am, Bethany interrupted, her voice rising just enough to draw attention from nearby travelers, I'm going to need you to step aside. You're holding up the line. If you have an issue, you can speak with a supervisor after you've checked in through the proper channels. The proper channels. Simone had heard that phrase before. It was code. It meant, shut up and accept your place. But Simone Blake hadn't become a neurosurgeon by accepting her place. She'd become a neurosurgeon by demanding the place she'd earned. I'd like to speak with your supervisor now, please, Simone said, her voice steady but firm. Bethany's smile vanished entirely. Our supervisor is very busy. You can file a complaint online if you'd like, but right now you need to move. She gestured toward the regular check-in line, which had grown even longer, snaking back toward the terminal entrance. Simone looked at Kennedy, saw the worry creeping into her daughter's eyes and made a calculation. They could stand here and fight, turn this into a scene, risk missing their flight entirely, or they could swallow this indignity and move forward. She hated both options, but one of them got Kennedy to London. Come on, baby, Simone said softly, beginning to wheel Kennedy toward the regular line. As they moved away, she heard Bethany's voice, bright and cheerful now, greeting the next passenger. Welcome. How can I help you today? The contrast was stark, deliberate. They waited in the regular line for 45 minutes. By the time they reached the check-in counter, Kennedy was tired, shifting uncomfortably in her wheelchair. The agent who finally helped them was apologetic, confirming that yes, their priority assistance should have been honored, but there was nothing she could do about it now. Their boarding passes were printed, their bags were checked, and they were directed toward security. We'll make sure you get pre-boarding at the gate, the agent assured them, her eyes sympathetic. I'm sorry about the confusion. Confusion. That's what they were calling it now. Security was another ordeal. Kennedy had to be screened separately because of her wheelchair, which meant Simone had to watch as TSA agents swabbed every inch of the chair, asked Kennedy to stand if she could, and subjected them both to additional screening while other passengers streamed past with barely a glance. Simone knew the drill. She stayed calm, answered every question, complied with every request, all while keeping Kennedy calm and reassured. By the time they reached the gate, they had 30 minutes before boarding. Simone approached the desk, showing their boarding passes to the gate agent, a young man who looked fresh out of college. We have pre-boarding arrangements for my daughter's wheelchair, she explained. He nodded, checking his computer. Yes, I see that here. We'll call you up first when we're ready to board. Relief washed over Simone. Finally, something was going according to plan. They found seats near the gate, and Kennedy pulled out her book, reading aloud to her mother about the history of space exploration. Simone listened, letting her daughter's enthusiasm soothe the raw edges of her frustration. This was what mattered. This moment. This joy. When boarding was announced, the gate agent called for passengers needing special assistance first, just as promised. Simone stood, beginning to wheel Kennedy toward the gate, when a familiar voice stopped them. Excuse me, where do you think you're going? Bethany Sullivan stood at the gate entrance, her smile sharp as broken glass. She was apparently working their flight. Of course she was. We're pre-boarding, Simone said, trying to keep the edge out of her voice. As arranged. I'll need to verify that, Bethany said, taking their boarding passes from the gate agent before he could protest. She examined them slowly, deliberately, as if looking for forgery. These say Group 3. Pre-boarding is for first class only. That's not true, the gate agent interjected, his voice uncertain. The system shows they have priority boarding due to the wheelchair. The system is wrong, Bethany said flatly. We're very full today and we need to board efficiently. They can board with their group. She handed the boarding passes back to Simone, her expression daring her to argue. Simone felt something crack inside her chest. Not break, just crack. Like ice on a lake beginning to give way. She looked at Kennedy, who was staring at her lap now, her book forgotten, and she saw her daughter trying to make herself smaller, trying not to be a problem, trying not to be seen. And that crack in Simone's chest widened. My daughter has special needs, Simone said quietly, dangerously. She requires extra time to board and get settled. This isn't about jumping the line or special treatment. This is about basic accommodation. Ma'am, I understand that, Bethany said in that sing-song voice people use when they're performing patients. But policies are policies. We have many passengers with special needs, and we can't accommodate everyone who asks. You'll board with Group 3 or you won't board at all. The gate agent looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Other passengers were watching now, some with sympathy, others with impatience, wanting the drama to resolve so they could get on their flight. Simone felt the weight of their eyes, the pressure to be reasonable, to be grateful, to not make a scene. She'd felt that weight her entire life. "Fine," Simone said, her voice hollow. "We'll wait." They stood to the side as first-class passengers boarded, their expensive carry-ons wheeled past with ease. Then premium economy. Then Group 1 and Group 2. By the time Group 3 was called, the jetway was crowded, and maneuvering Kennedy's wheelchair became a challenge. Simone apologized repeatedly as they squeezed past impatient travelers, Kennedy's chair bumping against bags and legs, until finally they emerged into the aircraft. The plane was a Boeing 777, configured for international travel, which meant the aisles were narrow and the seats were close together. Their seats were in row 34, near the back of the economy section. Simone had specifically requested an aisle seat for easier transfers, but when they reached their row she discovered 3 middle seats waiting for them. Someone had changed their seat assignments. Bethany appeared from the galley, her smile plastic and permanent. "Is there a problem?" "Our seats were supposed to be on the aisle," Simone said, her voice tight. "I have the confirmation." "We had to make some changes due to weight distribution," Bethany interrupted. "These are your seats now. Do you need help getting settled?" It wasn't a genuine offer. It was a challenge. Simone looked at the cramped middle seats, at Kennedy's wheelchair, at the narrow space between rows, and she wanted to scream. But she didn't. Instead, she carefully helped Kennedy transfer from the wheelchair to the seat, a process that took several minutes and required Kennedy to use all her upper body strength while Simone supported her. The passengers already seated in their row watched with barely concealed annoyance as Kennedy struggled, and Simone felt her face burn with a mixture of anger and shame that she hated herself for feeling. Once Kennedy was settled, Simone collapsed the wheelchair and attempted to store it in the overhead bin, but it was too large. Bethany stood nearby, watching but not helping, until finally another flight attendant, an older black woman with kind eyes, intervened. "Here, let me help you with that," she said softly. "We can store it in the closet up front." "Thank you," Simone breathed, grateful for this small mercy. The flight attendant, whose name tag read Patricia, gave her a knowing look. "I saw what happened at the gate. I'm sorry. Some people don't have any sense." She patted Simone's arm gently before disappearing with the wheelchair. The plane filled completely and soon they were taxiing toward the runway. Kennedy pressed her face against the window, watching the terminal buildings slide past, her excitement returning despite everything. "Mom, we're really going to London?" she whispered. "Yes, baby," Simone said, forcing a smile. "We're really going." The flight was scheduled for 8 hours and 45 minutes. 8 hours and 45 minutes trapped in a metal tube at 35,000 feet with nowhere to go and no escape. Simone tried to settle in, but the middle seat was cramped and her long legs had nowhere to go. Kennedy needed her medication at specific times, and Simone had packed everything carefully in her carry-on, stored in the overhead bin several rows back due to lack of space. As they reached cruising altitude, the seatbelt sign dinged off, and flight attendants began preparing for drink service. Simone watched as Bethany emerged from the galley with a cart, working her way down the aisle with mechanical efficiency. She was cheerful with some passengers, perfunctory with others, and Simone noticed a pattern. The white passengers got smiles and extra peanuts. The passengers of color got the bare minimum. When Bethany reached their row, she barely glanced at them. "Drinks? Could we have water, please?" Simone asked. "And do you have juice for my daughter?" Bethany handed them 2 cups of water without comment and moved on to the next row, where she laughed warmly at something a white passenger said, offering them a choice of snacks. Simone looked at the water, at Kennedy's disappointed face, and said nothing. "Pick your battles," she told herself. "Save your energy." An hour into the flight, Kennedy needed to use the restroom. Simone helped her out of her seat, supporting her as they made their way slowly down the aisle toward the lavatories at the back of the plane. Kennedy could walk short distances with assistance, but it was difficult and tiring. They reached the lavatory just as another passenger exited, and Simone helped Kennedy inside, waiting just outside the door. That's when Bethany appeared. "Excuse me, you can't block the aisle." "I'm just waiting for my daughter," Simone explained. "She needs assistance." "Well, you need to move. Other passengers need to get through." "Where would you like me to go?" Simone asked, her patience wearing dangerously thin. "I'm standing as far to the side as possible." "That's not my problem," Bethany said. "You're creating a safety hazard." Before Simone could respond, Kennedy emerged from the lavatory, her face flushed with effort and embarrassment. She'd heard everything. Simone helped her back to their seats in silence, seething with a rage she wouldn't express, because the moment she raised her voice, the moment she showed anger, she'd be the problem. She'd be the aggressive black woman. The difficult passenger. The one who got escorted off planes by security. The meal service began 2 hours into the flight. Simone had pre-ordered special meals for both of them weeks ago, vegetarian for herself and a child's meal for Kennedy. As Bethany worked her way through the cabin with meal trays, Simone noticed she was skipping their row. She watched as Bethany served the rows in front of them, then continued past them to serve the rows behind them, leaving them sitting there with empty tray tables while everyone around them ate. "Excuse me," Simone called out as Bethany passed their row for the third time. "We're still waiting for our meals." Bethany stopped, looking at them as if surprised they were still there. "Did you pre-order meals?" "Yes, I confirmed them 3 weeks ago. Vegetarian for me, child's meal for my daughter." Bethany sighed, an exaggerated sound of inconvenience. "Let me check." She disappeared into the galley and didn't return for 20 minutes. When she finally came back, she was empty-handed. "We don't have your special meals. They must not have been loaded." "What do you mean they weren't loaded?" Simone demanded, her voice rising despite her best efforts to stay calm. "I confirmed them multiple times." "Well, they're not here now," Bethany said with a shrug. "You can have what's left from the regular service, but most of it's gone." Kennedy tugged at Simone's sleeve. "Mom, it's okay. I'm not that hungry." "But it wasn't okay. Nothing about this was okay. What do you have left?" Simone asked through gritted teeth. "I'll see what I can find." Bethany returned with 2 sad-looking trays containing dried-out pasta and wilted salad, items that were clearly the rejected leftovers. She practically threw them onto their tray tables. "Here you go." Kennedy picked at her food while Simone watched other passengers enjoy full, hot meals. She noticed Patricia, the other flight attendant, serving in the forward cabin, and she wondered if things would have been different if Patricia had been assigned to their section. But Patricia wasn't. Bethany was. And Bethany had made her intentions clear from the moment they'd met at check-in. This was targeted. This was deliberate. And there was nothing Simone could do about it 35,000 feet in the air. The flight dragged on. Kennedy tried to sleep, curling up as best she could in the cramped middle seat, her head resting against Simone's shoulder. Simone stayed awake, her mind racing, documenting everything in her phone's notes app. Times, incidents, exact quotes as best as she could remember them. She was building a case, though she didn't yet know what she'd do with it. Around hour 6, Kennedy woke up needing her medication. Simone had to retrieve it from the overhead bin several rows back, and when she returned, she found Bethany standing over Kennedy, her expression cold. "Your daughter left her book in the seat pocket," Bethany said, holding up Kennedy's astronaut book. "Passengers need to keep their areas clean." The book had simply slipped from Kennedy's lap while she slept. It wasn't creating any mess. But Bethany held it like evidence of wrongdoing, like Kennedy had committed some cardinal sin by being a child who fell asleep reading. "Thank you," Simone said tightly, taking the book and helping Kennedy with her medication. As they began their descent into London, Simone felt something shift inside her. That crack in her chest had widened into a canyon, and at the bottom of that canyon was a decision. She'd spent her entire career fighting to be taken seriously, fighting to be seen as more than stereotypes and assumptions. She trained herself to stay calm under pressure, to be twice as good to get half as much, to smile when she wanted to scream. But watching Kennedy's excitement about this trip slowly drain away with each humiliation had broken something fundamental in her. After they landed and the seatbelt sign turned off, passengers began gathering their belongings in the typical chaotic rush to deplane. Simone stood carefully, helping Kennedy out of her seat while they waited for Patricia to bring the wheelchair from the front closet. Other passengers pushed past them impatiently, eager to get off the plane, and Simone used her body to shield Kennedy from the crush of people. Patricia arrived with the wheelchair, her expression apologetic. "I'm so sorry about everything," she said quietly as she helped Kennedy settle into the chair. "That wasn't right." "No," Simone agreed. "It wasn't." As they prepared to leave, Bethany appeared one final time, blocking their path down the aisle. She held a clipboard and her smile had returned, that horrible plastic smile. "Before you go, I need you to sign this incident report." "Incident report?" Simone repeated. "What incident?" "Your daughter had some difficulty in the lavatory earlier," Bethany said loudly enough for the remaining passengers to hear. "The facilities were left in an unsanitary condition, and we need documentation for the cleaning crew." Simone felt the blood drain from her face. She looked at Kennedy, who had gone completely still, her eyes wide with shock and mortification. This was a lie. A complete, calculated lie designed to humiliate them one last time. That's not true, Simone said, her voice shaking with fury. My daughter did nothing wrong. Ma'am, I'm just doing my job, Bethany said with false patience. If you won't sign the report, I'll have to note that you refuse to cooperate, and we may have to involve airport security. The few remaining passengers were watching now, and Simone saw their expressions, the way they were already judging, already assuming. She saw the trap Bethany had laid so carefully. If she refused to sign, she'd be the difficult one, the uncooperative passenger. Security would be called. Their vacation would end before it began. But if she signed, she'd be admitting to something that never happened, accepting blame for a humiliation designed specifically to hurt her daughter. Kennedy's voice was small, broken. Mom, let's just go. And that's when something in Simone finally, irrevocably shattered. Not in defeat, but in crystalline clarity. She looked at Bethany Sullivan, really looked at her, and she saw exactly what this woman was. A small person trying to feel big by making others feel small. A coward hiding behind a uniform and a clipboard. Someone so empty inside that the only way she could fill herself was by pouring contempt onto others. Simone took out her phone. Actually, before I sign anything, I'd like to document this conversation. For my records. She opened her voice recorder app, holding the phone up so Bethany could see it clearly. Could you please repeat your accusation about the lavatory? I want to make sure I have it accurately recorded. Bethany's smile faltered. You can't record me. Actually, I can, Simone said calmly. This is a work-related interaction, and I'm within my rights to document it, especially since you're asking me to sign a legal document. So please repeat your accusation. Clearly. For the record. The color drained from Bethany's face. Around them, the remaining passengers had stopped what they were doing, sensing that the dynamic had suddenly shifted. Patricia stood nearby, her eyes wide but not unsympathetic. Bethany stammered, looking at the clipboard in her hands as if it had betrayed her. It's just standard procedure. Standard procedure for what? Simone pressed, her surgeon's precision coming to the fore. You're claiming my 12-year-old daughter, who has limited mobility and whom I assisted to the lavatory, somehow left the facilities in an unsanitary condition. That's a very specific accusation. Did you personally inspect the lavatory after she used it? Well, no, but... So you didn't personally verify this alleged incident, but you're still asking me to sign a report about it? A report that will become part of our permanent passenger record. Simone's voice was steady now, clinical, the voice she used when explaining complex medical procedures to worried parents. I'm going to need more information before I sign anything. Starting with your full name, employee number, and the exact time you inspected the lavatory in question. Bethany looked around desperately as if searching for support, but the other passengers were just watching now, and Patricia had taken a careful step backward, distancing herself from the situation. You know what? Bethany said quickly, snatching the clipboard back. Maybe I was mistaken. You can go. I'm sorry? Simone said, not moving an inch. You were mistaken about what, exactly? Could you clarify that for the recording? There's no incident to report, Bethany said through gritted teeth. You're free to deplane. And the incident report you just asked me to sign? There is no incident report. That's interesting, Simone said, finally lowering her phone but not turning off the recording. Because approximately 2 minutes ago, you very clearly stated that there was an incident and that you needed documentation for the cleaning crew. So which is it? Bethany's hands were shaking now, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Just leave the plane, she hissed. We'd be happy to, Simone said pleasantly. But first, I'm going to need your full name and employee number. See, I'll be filing a formal complaint with Transatlantic Airways about the treatment we've received today, and I want to make sure I have all the correct information. Patricia? She turned to the other flight attendant, who had been watching the entire exchange with barely concealed satisfaction. Could you provide me with the information for filing a passenger complaint? Patricia smiled. Absolutely. You can find the complaint forms on the airline's website, or I can email you the direct link if you'd like. You'll need flight number, date, and the names of any crew members involved in the incidents you're reporting. Perfect. Thank you, Patricia. You've been the only person today who's treated us with basic human dignity, and I'll be sure to mention that in my report as well. Simone looked back at Bethany. So, your name and employee number. Bethany Sullivan, she bit out. Employee number 47892. Thank you. Simone typed it into her phone. Now Kennedy, let's go see London. As they made their way off the plane, Simone could feel her heart pounding, adrenaline coursing through her veins. She'd never done anything like that before. She'd always kept her head down, stayed professional, avoided confrontation. But something had changed. Or maybe something had finally reached its breaking point. In the jetway, Patricia caught up with them. "Dr. Blake?" she said quietly, and Simone was startled that she knew her title. "I found your name on the passenger manifest earlier," Patricia explained. "I wanted you to know that what happened today wasn't right. Bethany's been written up before for similar behavior, but she's got connections in management, so nothing ever seems to stick." "Connections?" Simone repeated. Patricia nodded. "Her uncle is Roger Sullivan. He's the VP of International Operations for Transatlantic." The information settled over Simone like a heavy blanket. Of course Bethany had connections. Of course she'd been protected despite multiple complaints. That's how these systems worked. They protected their own and ground everyone else down until they stopped complaining. "Thank you for telling me," Simone said. "And thank you for your kindness today. It meant more than you know." Patricia squeezed her hand. "You enjoy London. And don't let this ruin your trip." They made their way through immigration and customs, collected their luggage and finally emerged into the bright morning of London Heathrow. Kennedy was quiet, subdued in a way that broke Simone's heart. This should have been a moment of triumph, the beginning of their great adventure, but instead it felt tainted, shadowed by 8 hours of casual cruelty. At the hotel, after they'd checked in and settled into their room overlooking Hyde Park, Kennedy finally spoke. "Mom, why did she treat us like that?" Simone sat on the edge of the bed, pulling her daughter close. "How did you explain racism to a 12-year-old? How did you tell your child that some people would hate her for no reason other than the color of her skin? That her disability made her an even easier target? That the world wasn't always fair, and sometimes kindness lost to cruelty?" "Baby," Simone said carefully, "some people have pain inside them that they don't know how to deal with, so they try to make other people feel small because it makes them feel big. It's not about you. It's not about me. It's about them and what's broken inside them." "But it's not fair," Kennedy said, tears finally spilling over. "I didn't do anything wrong. I just wanted to go on a trip." "I know, baby. I know." Simone held her daughter while she cried, and she made a decision. She wasn't going to let this go. Not this time. That evening, after Kennedy had fallen asleep, exhausted from the trip and the emotional toll, Simone sat at the small desk in their hotel room with her laptop open. She began composing a formal complaint to Transatlantic Airways, documenting every incident from check-in to landing. But as she typed, she realized that a simple complaint wouldn't be enough. It would disappear into some corporate database, get a generic apology letter in response, and nothing would change. Bethany Sullivan would continue treating passengers with contempt, protected by her uncle's position, and the next black family would face the same humiliations. Simone thought about her position at Northwestern Memorial. She thought about the board she sat on, the medical conferences where she was often the only black woman in the room, the countless times she'd had to prove herself. And she thought about something else, something she'd been sitting on for months now, a decision she'd been debating. 6 months ago, she'd been approached by a medical investment consortium. They were looking for prominent physicians to join their advisory board, people who could lend credibility to their expanding portfolio of healthcare-related investments. One of those investments was an airline consulting firm that specialized in improving customer service and diversity training for major carriers. The consortium had been courting her aggressively, offering her not just a board seat but equity in the firm, saying her perspective as a physician who understood both healthcare needs and customer service would be invaluable. She'd been hesitant. It would mean more travel, more time away from Kennedy, more obligations. But now, staring at the complaint form on her screen, she saw an opportunity. A chance to turn this moment of humiliation into something more. Something that could actually create change. Simone opened her email and found the message from the consortium's chairman, Dr. Gerald Morrison, a retired surgeon she'd met at a conference. His offer was still open, he'd said. They'd love to have her on board whenever she was ready. She hit reply. "Gerald," she typed, "I'm ready to discuss the position. Let me know when you're available for a call. I have some ideas about where we might focus our consulting efforts." She sent the email, then returned to her complaint, making it as detailed and precise as a surgical report. Every incident. Every time. Every witness. She attached photos of her confirmation emails showing the priority assistance requests. She included Patricia's name as someone who could corroborate the events. And she ended with a clear statement. Transatlantic Airways has a systemic problem with disability discrimination and racial bias. This needs to be addressed at the highest levels of your organization, or your company will continue to face not just complaints, but legal action from passengers who refuse to accept this treatment. She hit send on the complaint, then sat back in her chair, looking out at the London skyline. The city was beautiful at night, all lit up and full of possibility. Just like Kennedy had dreamed. Over the next 2 weeks, Simone and Kennedy explored London together. They visited the Royal Observatory, where Kennedy stood on the Prime Meridian line and declared she was standing in 2 hemispheres at once. They saw the crown jewels at the Tower of London, took a boat ride on the Thames, and spent an entire afternoon in the British Museum looking at ancient artifacts. Slowly, Kennedy's spirit began to recover, her laughter returning, her excitement rekindling. But Simone didn't forget. She couldn't forget. 3 days into their trip, she received a response to her complaint. It was exactly what she'd expected. A generic apology and assurance that the matter would be investigated, a voucher for a future flight. The letter was signed by someone in the customer service department, not even a director-level executive. It was the corporate equivalent of a pat on the head and a dismissal. She also received a call from Gerald Morrison. He was thrilled she was considering the position and wanted to move quickly. "We've actually just landed a major contract with Transatlantic Airways," he said. "They're facing some pressure about their customer service ratings, particularly around disability accommodations and diversity issues. They want a comprehensive review and new training protocols. This could be a perfect project for you to take the lead on." Simone felt something click into place. The universe, she thought, has a funny sense of timing. "I'm very interested," she told Gerald. "But I have some conditions." "Name them." "I want full access to employee records, incident reports, and complaint data. I want to be able to interview passengers who've filed complaints. And I want final approval on any recommendations we make. If I'm doing this, I'm doing it right." Gerald was quiet for a moment. "That's aggressive. The airline might not agree to that level of access." "Then they're not serious about fixing the problem," Simone said simply. "And frankly, Gerald, if they're not serious about it, I'm not interested in being part of a cosmetic solution. I'll find another way to address this." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm a doctor with connections at major hospitals across the country. I know dozens of physicians, nurses, and medical professionals who travel constantly for conferences and patient consultations. If Transatlantic won't take this seriously, I'll make sure every medical professional I know understands what kind of treatment they can expect when flying with this airline." Word of mouth is a powerful thing in the medical community. It wasn't a threat, not exactly. It was a statement of fact. But Gerald understood the implication. "Let me talk to them," he said. "I think we can make this work." 2 days later, Gerald called back. Transatlantic had agreed to her terms. They wanted to move quickly before more complaints surfaced. They wanted a comprehensive review completed within 6 months, with implementation of new protocols to follow. And they were willing to pay handsomely for it. Simone accepted the position that same day. When they returned to Chicago, Simone threw herself into the work with the same intensity she brought to surgery. She requested all complaint records for the past 5 years. What she found was staggering. Hundreds of complaints about discriminatory treatment, disability accommodation failures, and staff misconduct. And the names of certain flight attendants appeared again and again. Bethany Sullivan was near the top of that list with 17 formal complaints over 3 years. 17 families who'd been treated with the same contempt Simone and Kennedy had experienced. 17 incidents that had been noted, filed, and ultimately ignored. But Simone also found something else in those records. A pattern of protection. Every time Bethany's behavior had been flagged, the investigation had been assigned to the same person, Thomas Brennan, a senior manager in the HR department. And Thomas Brennan reported directly to Roger Sullivan, Bethany's uncle. The complaints went up the chain and died there, suffocated by nepotism and indifference. Simone compiled everything into a presentation. She spent weeks on it, treating it like the most important surgery of her career. She gathered testimonies from passengers who'd filed complaints. She analyzed data showing that passengers with disabilities and passengers of color reported negative experiences with Transatlantic at rates significantly higher than with other carriers. She documented the financial cost of these failures, the lost business, the damaged reputation, the lawsuits that were quietly settled out of court. And then she requested a meeting with the executive leadership team. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday morning in October at Transatlantic's headquarters in Atlanta. Simone flew in the night before, Kennedy staying with her grandmother back in Chicago. She barely slept, rehearsing her presentation, anticipating objections, preparing for pushback. When she walked into that boardroom, she counted 12 executives. All white. 10 men, 2 women. They sat around a polished mahogany table that probably cost more than most people earned in a year, and they looked at her with expressions ranging from polite interest to barely concealed skepticism. Roger Sullivan was there, sitting near the head of the table. He was a large man with silver hair and the kind of confidence that came from never being questioned. Next to him sat the CEO, James Bradford, a thin man in his 60s who'd run Transatlantic for the past 8 years. "Dr. Blake," James said, gesturing to an empty seat. "Thank you for coming. We're eager to hear your findings." Simone didn't sit. Instead, she walked to the front of the room where a large screen was set up for presentations. "Thank you for meeting with me," she said, connecting her laptop. "What I'm about to show you is going to be uncomfortable. Some of you may feel defensive. Some of you may want to interrupt or explain. I'm asking you to hold those responses until I've finished." She could see Roger Sullivan's jaw tighten, but James nodded. "Proceed." The first slide was simple, a photo of Kennedy in her wheelchair, smiling at the camera. It was taken the morning before their flight to London, before everything had gone wrong. "This is my daughter, Kennedy," Simone began. "She's 12 years old. She loves astronomy, coding, and reading. She was born with spina bifida, which means she uses a wheelchair and requires some assistance with mobility. She's also brilliant, kind, and one of the bravest people I know. This past summer, I took her on her first international trip. We flew Transatlantic Airways from Chicago to London." She clicked to the next slide, which showed a timeline of events from their journey. "Over the course of that trip, spanning from check-in to landing, my daughter and I experienced 17 distinct incidents of discriminatory treatment. We were denied priority boarding despite confirmed arrangements. We were given incorrect seat assignments that made my daughter's disability more difficult to manage. We were denied proper meal service despite confirmed pre-orders. We were harassed when attempting to use the lavatory. And at the end of the flight, we were publicly accused of leaving the aircraft facilities in an unsanitary condition, a false accusation designed solely to humiliate a disabled child." The room was silent now, all eyes fixed on the screen. The flight attendant responsible for most of these incidents was Bethany Sullivan, employee number 47892. Simone clicked to the next slide, which showed Bethany's employee photo. She didn't look at Roger, but she could feel him bristling from across the room. "Miss Sullivan has been employed by Transatlantic for 4 years. In that time, she has received 17 formal complaints from passengers alleging discrimination, misconduct, and harassment." "Now wait just a minute," Roger started, but James held up a hand, silencing him. "Let her finish," he said quietly. Simone continued. 17 complaints in 4 years. That's 1 complaint every 3 months. For context, the average flight attendant at your airline receives approximately 0.3 complaints per year. Ms. Sullivan's rate is almost 23 times higher than average. She clicked through slides showing the data, the comparisons, the statistical anomalies. And yet, despite this pattern, Ms. Sullivan has never been suspended, never been required to undergo additional training, and never faced any meaningful disciplinary action. Why is that? She clicked to the next slide, which showed an organizational chart. Every investigation into Ms. Sullivan's conduct was handled by Thomas Brennan, Senior Manager of Employee Relations. Mr. Brennan reports directly to Roger Sullivan, Vice President of International Operations, who is also Bethany Sullivan's uncle. The room erupted. Roger Sullivan shot to his feet. "This is outrageous. You can't come in here and accuse." "I'm not accusing anyone of anything," Simone said calmly, her voice cutting through the noise like a scalpel. "I'm presenting facts, data, records from your own system. If you find these facts uncomfortable, perhaps you should ask yourself why." James Bradford was staring at the organizational chart, his face pale. "Roger, sit down," he said, his voice hard. "But she's—" "I said sit down." Roger Sullivan sat, his face red with fury, but he said nothing more. Simone moved to the next section of her presentation. "This isn't just about one flight attendant or one family. This is about a systemic failure in your company's culture and accountability structures. Over the past 5 years, Transatlantic Airways has received over 800 complaints related to discrimination, disability accommodation failures, and staff misconduct. Of those 800 complaints, Approximately 65% came from passengers of color, and 42% involved passengers with disabilities. Your company serves a diverse customer base, but a disproportionate number of those customers report negative experiences. She showed graphs, charts, comparison data with other airlines. Transatlantic's numbers were significantly worse across every metric. The financial impact of these failures is substantial, Simone continued. You've quietly settled 14 lawsuits in the past 3 years alone, paying out a total of approximately $4.2 million. Your customer satisfaction ratings have declined steadily, particularly among minority passengers and passengers with disabilities. Your net promoter score among these demographics is -18, meaning you have far more detractors than promoters. For comparison, your main competitor's score in these same demographics is +34. James Bradford was taking notes now, his expression grim. Other executives were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The cost of maintaining the status quo is not sustainable, Simone said. But more than that, it's not ethical. You are failing the people who trust you with their safety and their business. You are creating a culture where discrimination is tolerated as long as it's done quietly. And you are protecting employees who should have been terminated years ago. She clicked to her final slide, which showed a list of recommendations. I'm prepared to work with your team to implement a comprehensive reform program. This includes mandatory bias training for all customer-facing staff, revision of your complaint investigation procedures to eliminate conflicts of interest, establishment of an independent passenger advocacy office, improved disability accommodation protocols, and a review of all employees with multiple complaints to determine appropriate disciplinary action. She paused, looking directly at Roger Sullivan. This also includes the immediate termination of any employee who has demonstrated a pattern of discriminatory behavior and the removal of any manager who has failed to properly investigate or address such complaints. Roger Sullivan's face had gone from red to purple. You can't just come in here and demand we fire people. We have union contracts, employment laws, processes. You have liability, Simone interrupted. You have a documented pattern of discrimination that any plaintiff's attorney would love to get their hands on. You have employees who are actively damaging your reputation and costing you millions of dollars. And you have a choice. Address this proactively and demonstrate genuine commitment to change, or wait for the next lawsuit, the next viral video, the next PR disaster that brings all of this into the public eye. She closed her laptop and looked around the room. I'm not here to destroy your company. I'm here to help you fix it. But I won't participate in cosmetic changes or half measures. If you're not willing to do this right, then I'll walk out of this room right now, and you can deal with these problems on your own. The silence that followed was profound. Simone could hear the air conditioning humming, someone's pen clicking nervously, her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Finally, James Bradford spoke. Thank you, Dr. Blake. That was illuminating. We need to discuss this internally. Can you give us an hour? Of course, Simone said. She gathered her things and left the room, walking down the sterile corporate hallways until she found a quiet corner with a window overlooking the Atlanta skyline. Her hands were shaking. She just stood in front of 12 powerful people and essentially told them their company was broken and that some of them needed to be fired. It was either the bravest or the most foolish thing she'd ever done, and she wasn't sure which. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Kennedy. How's it going, Mom? Are you changing the world yet? Simone smiled despite her nerves. Working on it, baby. Working on it. 90 minutes later, she was called back into the boardroom. The atmosphere had changed. Roger Sullivan was gone. So were 2 other executives. The remaining people looked somber, determined. James Bradford stood when she entered. Dr. Blake, I want to apologize. What you've shown us today is unacceptable, and frankly, I'm embarrassed that I wasn't aware of the extent of these problems. I take responsibility for that failure in leadership. Simone nodded, saying nothing, waiting. We want to move forward with your recommendations, James continued. All of them. Roger Sullivan has been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation into his handling of employee complaints. Thomas Brennan has been removed from his position. And Bethany Sullivan's employment has been terminated effective immediately. Simone felt something loosen in her chest. What about the other employees with multiple complaints? We're reviewing all of them as you recommended. Anyone with a pattern of discriminatory behavior will be terminated. Anyone who failed to properly investigate or address complaints will face disciplinary action up to and including termination. And the systemic changes? The training, the protocols, the advocacy office. All approved. We want you to lead the implementation. Whatever resources you need, whatever authority you need, you'll have it. James paused. Dr. Blake, I know you have every reason not to trust us. But I'm asking you to give us a chance to do better. To be better. Simone looked around the room at the faces watching her, waiting for her response. She thought about Kennedy, about the look on her daughter's face when Bethany Sullivan had accused her of leaving the lavatory dirty. She thought about the 17 other families who'd filed complaints about Bethany, and the hundreds of other passengers who'd experienced similar treatment from other employees. She thought about all the times she'd stayed silent, swallowed her anger, accepted indignity because fighting seemed futile. I'll do it, she said. But I have one condition. Name it. I want to meet with every passenger who filed a complaint in the past 5 years. I want to hear their stories, understand their experiences, and incorporate their perspectives into our reforms. This isn't about what I think needs to change. It's about what they need. James smiled, a real smile this time, not the corporate smile she'd seen when she first walked in. Done. When can you start? I already started, Simone said. The day I filed my complaint. Over the next 6 months, Simone transformed Transatlantic Airways from the inside out. She interviewed dozens of passengers, each with their own story of discrimination, neglect, or outright hostility. There was Marcus, a blind man who'd been told he couldn't fly without a caretaker despite being perfectly capable of traveling independently. There was Yuki, a Japanese woman who'd been subjected to mockery of her accent by flight attendants. There was David, a man in a wheelchair who'd been left sitting on the plane for 2 hours after landing because ground crew forgot about him. Each story added to the picture of a company that had lost its way, that had prioritized efficiency over empathy and profit over people. But Simone also found allies within the company. People like Patricia, the flight attendant who'd been kind to them on that flight to London. Patricia had been working for Transatlantic for 20 years, and she'd seen the culture slowly deteriorate as new management focused more on metrics than on people. We used to care, Patricia told Simone during one of their meetings. We used to be trained to see every passenger as someone's mother, someone's child, someone's family. But somewhere along the way, passengers became numbers. Seats to fill. Problems to manage. Patricia became Simone's partner in developing the new training program. Together, they created modules that didn't just teach policy but fostered genuine empathy. They brought in passengers to share their experiences directly with staff. They role-played difficult situations, forcing employees to confront their own biases and assumptions. The resistance was significant. Some employees complained that the new protocols were too demanding, too time-consuming, too politically correct. Several older staff members resigned rather than undergo the training. But Simone held firm. If you can't treat every passenger with basic dignity and respect, she told one particularly vocal group of flight attendants, then this isn't the right job for you. The changes didn't happen overnight. There were setbacks, moments of frustration, times when Simone wondered if she was really making a difference or just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. But slowly the data began to shift. Complaint rates started dropping. Customer satisfaction scores began rising. And most importantly, passengers started sharing stories of positive experiences, of staff who went above and beyond, of a company that seemed to be genuinely changing. 8 months after that presentation in the boardroom, Simone was invited back to Transatlantic headquarters for a different kind of meeting. This time, James Bradford wanted to showcase the results of their work to the full board of directors. The data was impressive. Complaints related to discrimination had dropped by 62%. Customer satisfaction among passengers with disabilities had increased by 41%. Employee retention had actually improved despite the terminations, because the remaining staff felt proud of the changes and the culture they were building. But the most meaningful moment came near the end of the presentation, when James brought out a surprise guest. Patricia walked to the front of the room, and with her was a young black woman in a wheelchair, maybe in her early 20s. "This is my daughter Angela," Patricia said, her voice thick with emotion. "She has cerebral palsy, and for years I wouldn't let her fly on my own airline because I knew how she'd be treated. I saw what happened to passengers like her every day, and I couldn't bear to watch my own daughter go through that." She paused, wiping her eyes. "Last month, Angela flew transatlantic for the first time in her life. I wasn't on her flight. I wasn't there to protect her or intervene. And you know what happened? She was treated with respect, with kindness, with dignity. She came home telling me it was the best travel experience she'd ever had." Patricia looked at Simone. "Dr. Blake, you didn't just change policies. You changed lives. You changed my daughter's life. And I know you changed countless other lives too." So on behalf of every passenger who's ever been made to feel less than human, thank you. The room erupted in applause, and Simone felt tears streaming down her face. This was why she'd fought. This was why she'd refused to stay silent, to accept that one bad experience was just the cost of doing business in an unjust world. After the meeting, as Simone was gathering her things, James Bradford approached her. Dr. Blake, I have a proposal for you. We'd like to offer you a permanent position as our Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer. Full-time, executive level, with the authority to continue this work across all aspects of our operations. Simone was taken aback. I appreciate the offer, but I'm a surgeon. That's my calling. I understand, James said. But what you've done here has saved more lives than you might realize. You've made it possible for people with disabilities, people of color, people who'd been made invisible or unimportant, to travel safely and with dignity. That matters. That has value beyond what we can measure. Simone thought about it. She thought about Kennedy, about all the times her daughter would have to navigate a world that wasn't built for her, that didn't always see her as fully human. She thought about the power of being in a room where decisions were made, where she could ensure that people like her daughter were considered, protected, valued. Can I do both? She asked. Maintain my surgical practice and serve as a consultant on major initiatives? James smiled. I think we can work something out. 3 months later, Simone sat in the living room of their Chicago home, Kennedy curled up next to her on the couch. They were watching a documentary about the Apollo missions, Kennedy narrating facts she'd already memorized about lunar trajectories and orbital mechanics. It was a peaceful moment, ordinary and extraordinary all at once. Simone's phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from a woman named Claire Rodriguez, someone she didn't know. The subject line read, "Thank you for giving me my dignity back." Simone opened the email. Claire explained that she was a wheelchair user who'd filed multiple complaints with various airlines over the years, always hitting dead ends, always being told that her experiences were isolated incidents, that the companies were sorry but couldn't do much. She'd recently flown transatlantic and had been shocked by the difference. For the first time in my life, Claire wrote, I felt like the staff actually saw me as a person, not a problem. They anticipated my needs before I had to ask. They treated me with respect. And when I thanked them, they told me about the new training program and mentioned your name. So I looked you up and I found articles about what you did. Dr. Blake, you took your pain and turned it into purpose. You took your daughter's humiliation and transformed it into dignity for thousands of strangers. I don't have the words to tell you what that means to me, but I wanted you to know. You changed my life. Simone read the email twice, then set her phone down and looked at Kennedy. Baby, remember our flight to London? Remember how hard that was? Kennedy nodded, her smile fading slightly. Yeah, I remember. I want you to know that we didn't go through that for nothing. What happened to us was wrong and it hurt, but we turned it into something good. We made it so other kids like you, other families like ours, won't have to experience what we did. Does that make sense? Kennedy was quiet for a moment, processing. Then she said, so we were like, the test subjects? Like in an experiment? Simone laughed despite herself. Kind of, yeah. Except we didn't volunteer for it. But we made the results better for everyone else, Kennedy said thoughtfully. That's actually pretty cool, Mom. Like we're science. We're science, Simone agreed, pulling her daughter closer. And we're warriors. And we're survivors. And most importantly, we're here together and we're okay. We're better than okay, Kennedy said. We're amazing. And you know what? Simone thought. We really are. Here's the thing about injustice. It thrives in silence. It grows in the spaces where people are too tired to fight, too scared to speak up, too defeated to believe that change is possible. For years, Simone had been one of those silent people, swallowing indignities, accepting unacceptable treatment, telling herself that it wasn't worth the fight. But that flight to London had broken something open in her, and through that crack had poured a river of determination she didn't know she possessed. She'd learned that courage wasn't about never being afraid. It was about being terrified and doing the right thing anyway. It was about standing in a boardroom full of powerful people who didn't want to hear what you had to say and saying it anyway. It was about taking your private pain and turning it into public purpose, about refusing to let your suffering be meaningless. And she'd learned something else too, that one person could make a difference. Not by being perfect, not by having all the answers, but by refusing to accept that things had to stay the way they were. By demanding better. By showing up. By not giving up. 6 months after Simone's reforms were fully implemented, Transatlantic Airways won an award from the National Disability Rights Network for excellence in accessibility and customer service. Simone was invited to accept the award on behalf of the company, and she brought Kennedy with her to the ceremony. As they stood on that stage, looking out at an audience of advocates, passengers, and industry leaders, Simone held her daughter's hand and thought about how far they'd come from that terrible day at O'Hare Airport. She thought about Bethany Sullivan, and she hoped that wherever Bethany was now, she was learning to be a better person. She thought about Roger Sullivan and Thomas Brennan, whose careers had ended because they'd prioritized protecting the wrong people. She thought about Patricia and the hundreds of other transatlantic employees who'd embraced the changes and made them real. But mostly she thought about all the passengers she'd never meet, all the families who would travel without fear of discrimination, all the children in wheelchairs who would be treated with the dignity they deserved. Those were the real victories. Those were the moments that mattered. When it was her turn to speak, Simone kept it simple. "This award doesn't belong to me," she said. "It belongs to every passenger who's ever filed a complaint, who's ever refused to accept poor treatment, who's ever demanded better. It belongs to employees like Patricia who maintained their compassion even when the system discouraged it. And it belongs to my daughter, Kennedy, who taught me that disability doesn't make you less than, discrimination doesn't define you, and courage can look like a 12-year-old girl in a wheelchair refusing to let the world make her small." The audience rose in a standing ovation, and Kennedy, brilliant and brave Kennedy, beamed with pride. That night, back in their hotel room, Kennedy asked, "Mom, do you think Bethany Sullivan ever thinks about us?" Simone considered the question carefully. "I don't know, baby. Maybe she does. Maybe she regrets what she did, or maybe she's convinced she was right all along. But here's what I know, whether she thinks about us or not doesn't matter. What matters is that we didn't let her win. We didn't let her make us bitter or defeated. We took what she meant for evil and turned it into good. Like in that Bible story Grandma tells," Kennedy said. "About Joseph and his brothers? Exactly like that." Kennedy was quiet for a moment, then said, "I'm glad it happened, Mom. I mean, I wish it hadn't been so hard, but I'm glad we did something about it. I'm glad we fought back." And that, Simone thought, was the greatest victory of all. Not the policy changes or the awards or even the hundreds of passengers who would never know how close they'd come to experiencing the same discrimination. The greatest victory was that her daughter had learned a lesson that would serve her for the rest of her life, that you don't have to accept injustice, that your voice matters. That one person, even a 12-year-old girl in a wheelchair, can change the world. Before you go, I want to ask you something. Have you ever experienced discrimination while traveling? Have you ever been made to feel less than human because of your race, your disability, your appearance, or any other part of who you are? Drop your story in the comments below. Your experience matters. Your voice matters. And together, we can keep pushing for a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you that one person really can make a difference, please hit that subscribe button. Because there are so many more stories like this one, stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, stories of courage in the face of injustice, stories that need to be told. And I'll be here, every week, bringing you those stories. Dr. Simone Blake's fight didn't end with that award ceremony. In the years that followed, she became a nationally recognized advocate for disability rights and airline accessibility. She consulted with other airlines, with airports, with government agencies. She testified before Congress about the need for stronger protections for passengers with disabilities. She wrote a book about her experience that became a bestseller and inspired thousands of people to speak up about their own experiences with discrimination. But the work she was proudest of? It wasn't the big, public victories. It was the small moments. The emails from passengers thanking her for making their travel experience bearable. The letters from parents saying their disabled children could now fly without fear. The messages from flight attendants who said the training had changed how they saw their job and their passengers. Kennedy grew up watching her mother turn pain into purpose, and she learned to do the same. At 16, she started a nonprofit organization that provided travel resources and advocacy for disabled young people. At 18, she testified before the Department of Transportation about accessibility in public spaces. And at 22, when she graduated with a degree in aerospace engineering, she gave a speech about how the sky was no longer the limit because people like her mother had fought to make sure everyone could reach it. The flight that was supposed to be a celebration had turned into a nightmare, but that nightmare had transformed into a movement. And that movement had created ripples that spread far beyond one family, one airline, one moment of injustice. Because that's how change happens. Not through one grand gesture, but through 1,000 small acts of courage. Through people who refuse to stay silent. Through individuals who look at a broken system and say, "Not on my watch." Through mothers who teach their daughters that they are worthy of dignity, and daughters who grow up believing it so deeply that they change the world. Dr. Simone Blake and Kennedy Blake. Remember those names. Because they're proof that when you stand up, speak out, and refuse to accept injustice, you don't just change your own story. You change the story for everyone who comes after you. And that, right there, is the most powerful thing any of us can do.